The grandfather clock had just struck midnight when a frantic knock shattered the silence. Franklin McCullough, a 72-year-old war veteran, wasn't expecting visitors, especially not his 10-year-old grandson Liam, barefoot and trembling on the doorstep. "Grandpa run," the boy gasped, his small hands clutching Frank's shirt. "They're coming to take your house tonight, and Dad's with them." As distant headlights cut through the darkness, Frank made a chilling discovery. The land beneath his home held a secret worth killing for. Something will happen next in this story that you would have never imagined. From which country are you following this emotional thriller? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe now, because the shocking truth about Frank's family legacy is about to be revealed, and you won't believe who's really behind it all. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep chime echoing through the empty rooms of the old house. Franklin McCullough, Frank to those who still remembered him, sat in his worn leather armchair, the one with the tear in the left cushion that Martha had always meant to fix. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind rattled the loose shutter on the upstairs window, the one he kept meaning to nail back into place. He wasn't asleep. He never slept much these days. Not since the funeral. Not since the house had grown too quiet. Then, a sound, soft at first, a scrape against the back door, like a branch tapping glass. But there were no trees near the porch. Frank set aside his book, the spine cracking as he did. His knees protested as he stood, the old injury from his logging days flaring up. He didn't reach for the revolver in the drawer. Not yet, but his fingers twitched toward it. Another knock, quicker this time, urgent. He moved through the darkened kitchen, the linoleum cold under his bare feet. The moon cast a pale glow through the curtains, just enough to see by. His hand hovered over the deadbolt. "Who's there?" he called, voice rough with disuse. No answer, just the wind. Then, so quiet he almost missed it, "Grandpa." Frank's breath caught. That voice. He knew that voice. He threw open the door. Liam stood on the back step, his small frame shivering in nothing but a thin t-shirt and pajama pants. His feet were bare, dirty from running. His face was streaked with tears, his eyes wide and wild. "Liam? What in God's name?" The boy lunged forward, small hands clutching at Frank's flannel shirt. "You gotta run," he gasped, the words tumbling out between panic breaths. "They're coming. Tonight, they're gonna take the house." Frank's hands closed around Liam's shoulders. The boy was trembling. "Who's coming? Slow down now. Tell me straight." Liam shook his head, his fingers digging into Frank's arms. "Dad and them, the men from town. They've got papers. They said if you don't sign, they'll make you leave anyway." His voice dropped to a whisper. "They've got guns, Grandpa." The words hit Frank like a punch to the gut. His own son, his boy, mixed up in this. A cold rage settled in his chest, but he kept his voice steady for Liam's sake. "How'd you find out?" Liam swallowed hard. "I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard them talking downstairs. Dad was laughing with them. He said you were too stubborn to listen, so they'd do it the hard way." His lower lip quivered. "I climbed out my window and ran the whole way here." Frank pulled Liam inside and shut the door behind them. His mind raced. He'd known something was off. The strange calls from the bank, the surveyors poking around his land last week, the way Carl had been avoiding him for months. But this, his own flesh and blood, bringing men to his door in the dead of night. He looked down at Liam. The boy's cheeks were flushed from running, his hair damp with sweat. He couldn't have been more than 10, but his eyes were too old for his age. Just like Carl's had been, back when a sound cut through the night. Engines, multiple, from the sound of it, rumbling down the long gravel drive. Liam's head snapped up. "They're here." Frank moved fast. He grabbed a revolver from the kitchen drawer, checked the load. 5 rounds. He tucked it into the waistband of his pants. Then he knelt in front of Liam. "Listen to me. There's a loose floorboard under the rug in my bedroom. You remember showing you that?" Liam nodded. "Good. You're gonna go pull it up. There's a metal box inside. You bring that to me. Then you wait by the back door. Don't come out till I say. Understand? Liam hesitated. What are you gonna do? Frank stood, his jaw set. What I should have done a long time ago. The headlights swept across the front windows as the vehicles pulled into the yard. Doors slammed. Voices carried on the night air, laughing like this was some kind of party. Frank took a deep breath. 72 years old, and here he was about to face down his own son and God knew who else. But he'd be damned if he let them take this house. Not without a fight. He looked at Liam one last time. Go. Now. The boy darted down the hall, just as the first heavy knock shook the front door. Frank, a voice called. Too cheerful, too familiar. Come on out, old man. We got business to discuss. Frank didn't answer. He stood in the dark living room, listening to the creak of floorboards above him as Liam worked at the hiding place, listening to the impatient shifting of boots on his front porch. Waiting. The knock came again, harder this time. Frank, we ain't gonna ask nice forever. A hand touched his elbow. Liam, holding the metal box. It was smaller than Frank remembered, but just as heavy. Stay behind me, Frank murmured. He slid the box into his jacket pocket, then moved toward the back door. They stepped out into the cold night air. The woods loomed behind the house, dark and endless. Frank knew every inch of that land, knew where the old hunting trails led, knew where a man could disappear if he needed to. He took Liam's hand. We're gonna run now. You stick close and you don't look back. Liam nodded, his small fingers tightening around Frank's. Behind them, the front door splintered open with a crash. Frank didn't wait to hear what came next. He ran. The trees swallowed them whole. Branches clawed at Frank's arms and face as he pushed through the undergrowth. Liam's hand locked in his. The boy kept up surprisingly well, his small legs pumping, his breath coming in quick gasps but never faltering. Behind them, shouts erupted from the house. A man's voice, Carl's voice, yelling something Frank couldn't make out. Then the sharp crack of a gunshot, followed by another. Liam flinched but didn't slow down. Frank veered left toward the creek. The water would hide their trail, at least for a while. His lungs burned, his bad knee screamed in protest, but he pushed forward, one foot in front of the other, deeper into the dark. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes, Frank slowed. He pulled Liam behind a thick oak, its gnarled roots creating a natural hiding spot. They crouched there listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the wind in the leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Frank let out a shaky breath. He turned to Liam. The boy's face was pale in the moonlight, his eyes huge. You okay? Frank whispered. Liam nodded. Then, in a voice so small it nearly broke Frank's heart, why is Dad doing this? Frank didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense to a 10-year-old. So he just shook his head. Grown-ups do stupid things sometimes. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the metal box. It was cold in his hands, the lock rusted, but still holding. Martha's box, the one she'd made him promise never to open unless it was life or death. Well, he reckoned this qualified. He took out his pocket knife and wedged it under the lid. The metal groaned, then gave way with a pop. Inside, nestled in yellowed newspaper, was a single envelope. Frank's hand shook as he picked it up. His name was written on the front in Martha's looping cursive. He tore it open. A deed, but not for the house, for the land beneath it. And a note, just 3 words. Don't let go. Frank stared at the papers, his mind racing. He'd lived on this land for 50 years, raised a family here, buried his wife here, and he'd never once known about this. A twig snapped somewhere to their right. Frank shoved the papers back into the box and grabbed Liam's hand. We gotta keep moving. But as they stood, a flashlight beam cut through the trees, sweeping across the ground just feet from where they hid. Frank froze. The light paused, swung back, and then a voice, calm, amused, called out, "Found you." Frank's blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. Dale Mercer, the man who'd been after his land for years. The man who'd sat at his kitchen table just last month, smiling over coffee while he slid a purchase agreement across the table. the man who hadn't taken no for an answer. The flashlight beam inched closer, illuminating the trunk of their hiding tree. Frank pressed a finger to his lips. Liam nodded, his small body pressed tight against Frank's side. Dale's boots crunched on dead leaves. "Come on now, Frank. We both know how this ends. No sense making it harder than it has to be." Frank's hand drifted to the revolver at his waist. 5 rounds. Not enough. Dale wasn't alone. Frank could hear at least 2 other men moving through the trees, their footsteps heavy, deliberate. "Carl," Dale called, his voice carrying. "They're over here." Frank's stomach twisted. His own son, hunting him like an animal. He leaned down to Liam's ear. "When I say go, you run that way." He pointed deeper into the woods. "There's an old hunter's cabin about a mile east. You remember where I showed you?" Liam's eyes were wide with fear, but he nodded. Frank squeezed his shoulder. "You get there, you lock the door, and you don't open it for anyone but me. Understand?" Another nod. Frank took a deep breath. Then he stood, stepped out from behind the tree, and raised a revolver. Dale froze, the flashlight beam catching Frank square in the chest. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a beard that hid most of his smile. But he wasn't smiling now. "Easy there, old-timer," Dale said, holding up his free hand. The other held a shotgun, loose at his side. "No need for that." "Seems like there's every need," Frank said, his voice steady. Dale's eyes flicked to the trees behind Frank. "Carl, get out here." A moment later, Carl stepped into the light. He looked different than Frank remembered. His hair shorter, his face harder. But it was still his boy, still the kid who used to sit on his lap, while Frank whittled toy boats from scrap wood. "Dad," Carl said, "put the gun down." Frank didn't lower the revolver. "You brought these men to my house." Carl's jaw tightened. "It's just business." Business. Frank nearly choked on the word. "You threatened your own son to get to me." Carl's eyes flicked to where Liam still hid behind the tree. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be asleep. Frank felt something inside him break. "Go," he said to Liam, never taking his eyes off Carl. Liam bolted. Dale swung the shotgun up, but Frank was faster. He fired once, the shot going wide on purpose, but it was enough to make Dale duck. After him. Dale roared. 2 men took off after Liam, crashing through the underbrush. Frank moved to stop them, but Carl stepped his path. "Don't," Carl said, his voice low. "Just walk away, Dad. Sign the papers, take the money, and walk away." Frank stared at his son, really looked at him, and for the first time he saw the truth, the greed in his eyes, the hunger for something that would never fill him up. "I'm sorry," Frank said. Then he turned and ran. Shots rang out behind him. Branches whipped his face as he charged through the dark, following the sound of Liam's footsteps ahead. The boy was fast, but the men were gaining. Frank pushed harder, his old heart pounding in his chest. Up ahead, Liam stumbled. One of the men lunged for him. Frank didn't think. He raised a revolver and fired. The man went down. The other one froze, then turned and ran back the way he'd come. Frank grabbed Liam's arm and pulled him up. "You hurt." Liam shook his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Good. Then let's go." They ran. Behind them, voices shouted. More gunshots. But Frank didn't look back. The cabin was close now. Just a little farther. Just a little. A searing pain tore through Frank's shoulder. He stumbled, nearly taking Liam down with him. "Grandpa!" Frank gritted his teeth. "Keep going." Blood soaked through his shirt, warm and sticky. His vision blurred at the edges. But he forced himself to keep moving, one foot in front of the other. The cabin came into view, a small, sagging structure nearly swallowed by the woods. They burst through the door. Frank slammed it shut behind them, dropping the bar into place. Then his legs gave out. Liam caught him as best he could, easing him to the floor. "You're bleeding." Frank grimaced. "Just a scratch." But they both knew it was worse than that. Outside, the voices grew closer. Frank pressed the metal box into Liam's hands. "Hide this," he gasped. "However you have to." Liam's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how. You'll figure out. Frank managed a weak smile. You're a McCullough. Stubborn runs in the blood. Boots pounded up the steps. The door shook on the first blow. Frank reached for the revolver. 2 rounds left. He looked at Liam. Whatever happens next, you remember, this land is yours now. You protect it. The door splintered. Frank raised a gun and waited. The first axe blow sent splinters flying. Moonlight streamed through the fresh crack in the door, illuminating Liam's tear-streaked face. Frank's hands shook as he cocked the revolver. 2 shots. Maybe enough to buy time. Maybe not. Liam, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's a loose floorboard under the cot. You take that box, you get down there, and you stay quiet no matter what you hear. Understand? Liam clutched the metal box to his chest. I'm not leaving you. Another axe strike. The door groaned on its hinges. Frank reached out, cupping the back of Liam's head the way he used to when the boy was small. This isn't goodbye. It's just hide and seek. The wood split with a crack. Through the gap, Frank saw Dale's grinning face. Go! Frank shoved Liam toward the cot. Just as the door burst open, Dale stepped inside, shotgun first. Behind him crowded Carl, and 2 other men Frank didn't recognize. All armed, all breathing hard from the chase. Well now, Dale said, wiping sweat from his brow. This is a fine mess. Frank kept the revolver trained on Dale's chest. Far as I can tell, you're trespassing. Dale chuckled. Funny thing about that, Carl here tells me you never actually owned this land, just the house sitting on it. He tapped the shotgun barrel against his palm. Turns out this whole time, you were the trespasser. Frank's grip on the gun tightened. He'd suspected as much since reading Martha's note, but hearing it confirmed sent a fresh wave of anger through him. 50 years. 50 years of memories, of sweat, of love poured into ground that wasn't his. And Martha had known. Where's the boy? Carl demanded, scanning the small cabin. Frank didn't flinch. Gone. Carl's face darkened. He moved toward the cot. Frank shifted the revolver's aim. Take another step, and I put a bullet in your boss's heart. Dale held up a hand, stopping Carl. Easy now. No need for that. He took a careful step forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over that deed Martha hid. Then you're going to walk out of here with your son. Start fresh somewhere else. Frank barked a laugh. And if I say no? Dale's smile faded. Then I take it anyway. And the boy disappears. The words hung in the air like smoke. Frank's finger tightened on the trigger. A floorboard creaked. Dale's eyes flicked downward, just for an instant, but it was enough. Frank saw the realization dawn. Liam was under the floor. Frank made his choice. He fired. The shot caught Dale in the shoulder, spinning him around. Chaos erupted. Carl lunged. Frank swung the revolver toward him. Click. Empty. Carl's fist connected with Frank's jaw. The old man went down hard, his head bouncing off the wooden floor. Stars exploded across his vision. Through the haze, he saw Dale clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Find the boy. Dale snarled. Carl dropped to his knees, tearing at the floorboards. Frank tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. He could only watch as Carl pried up the loose board and froze. The space beneath was empty. No Liam. No box. Just dust. Carl whirled on Frank. Where is he? Frank smiled through split lips. Guess you'll have to ask your son when you see him again. Dale kicked Frank in the ribs. Pain lanced through his side. Tear this place apart, he ordered. They can't have gone far. As the men ransacked the cabin, Frank closed his eyes. He pictured Liam, small, quick, smart as a whip, slipping out the back while the men were distracted. Headed where, he didn't know, but alive, that was enough. A boot connected with his ribs again. Frank curled around the pane, his hand brushing against something cold beneath the floor's edge. Metal. His fingers closed around it just as darkness swallowed him whole. Voices swam in and out of focus. Bleeding too much. Just leave him. Need the deed first. Frank clung to consciousness like a man dangling from a cliff. Every breath sent fire through his ribs. His left eye had swollen shut, but his right hand still clutched the cold metal object he'd found. A key, small, tarnished, hung on a thin leather cord. Martha's key. The realization cut through the fog in his mind. The box had a lock. This must open it, which meant Liam had taken the box but left the key. Smart boy. Footsteps approached. Frank slipped the key into his pocket, just as Carl hauled him up into a sitting position against the wall. "Last chance, Dad," Carl said, his voice tight. "Where's Liam?" Frank spat blood. "Somewhere you'll never find him." Carl's fist clenched. For a second, Frank thought he might strike again. But then Dale groaned from across the room, clutching his bandaged shoulder. "We're wasting time," Dale said. "The old man's no use to us without the boy. And if that kid reaches town..." Carl stood abruptly. "We'll find him." As the men filed out, Dale paused in the doorway. "Don't worry, Frank. We'll be back. And next time, we'll bring your grandson's body with us." The door slammed shut. Silence. Frank waited until the sound of engines faded into the distance before attempting to move. Every muscle screamed in protest as he dragged himself to the cot. The loose floorboard hung askew. Frank reached beneath it, fingers probing the dusty hollow. Nothing. Then his pinky brushed against something rough. Carving. Frank pulled himself closer, squinting in the dim light. There, scratched into the wood. Water tower. Frank exhaled sharply. The old water tower on the north edge of the property, half a mile through dense woods. A place he'd taken Liam fishing last summer. The boy was leading him. Gritting his teeth, Frank grabbed the cot's frame and hauled himself upright. The room spun. His legs threatened to buckle, but he'd be damned if he'd die in this cabin. He staggered to the door, pausing to grab a rusted hatchet from the wall. Not much, but better than nothing. The woods greeted him with a cold embrace. Dawn was still hours away, the moon his only guide. Frank moved like a man twice his age, slow, unsteady, each step a battle. But he moved, branches toward his clothes. Roots seemed to rise up to trip him. More than once, he fell, only to claw his way back up. The key burned in his pocket. The water tower loomed ahead, its rusted legs rising like a skeleton from the trees. Frank paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning for movement. Nothing. "Liam," he called softly. No answer. Frank approached the tower's base, where a small maintenance hatch sat at ground level. The lock had been broken years ago. He tugged the door open, wincing at the screech of rusted hinges. Darkness inside. "Grandpa!" The whisper came from above. Frank tilted his head back. High up in the tower's belly, a small face peered down through the grating. "Liam." Frank nearly wept. The boy scrambled down the interior ladder, dropping the last few feet to land in Frank's arms. The old man held him tight, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "You're hurt," Liam said, pulling back to examine Frank's face. "Nothing that won't heal." Frank cupped the boy's chin. "You have the box?" Liam nodded, then reached into a crevice in the tower's support beam and pulled out the metal box. "I couldn't open it." Frank took the box with one hand, the key with the other. The lock turned with a satisfying click. Inside lay the deed, just as before. But beneath it, something new. A yellowed map of the property, with a section near the creek circled in red, and a second note in Martha's handwriting. "The truth is buried here. Forgive me." Frank stared at the map, his mind racing. What truth? What had Martha known all these years? A twig snapped outside. Liam went rigid. "They're coming." Frank stuffed the map and deed into his shirt. "Then we'd better move." They slipped out the tower's opposite side, just as flashlights swept the clearing. Frank led Liam along the creek bed, their progress slow, but steady. The map burned against his chest. Somewhere ahead lay answers. Somewhere ahead lay the truth Martha had died protecting. And Frank intended to uncover it, no matter the cost. The creek water ran black in the moonlight, swirling around Frank's ankles as he and Liam picked their way downstream. The cold helped numb the pain in Frank's ribs, but each step still sent sharp jolts through his body. Behind them, the occasional shout echoed through the trees, Dale's men were spreading out, searching. Liam gripped Frank's hand tighter. "Where are we going?" Frank touched the map hidden beneath his shirt. "Somewhere your grandma wanted me to find." The red circle on the map marked a spot near the old willow tree where Martha used a picnic. Frank had proposed to her under that tree 53 summers ago. Now its branches hung low over the creek like a curtain of leaves. As they approached, Frank noticed something odd. The earth beneath the willow had sunk slightly, forming a shallow depression. Kneeling with a groan, he brushed away layers of dead leaves to reveal a flat stone nearly buried in the dirt. "Help me with this," Frank said. Liam dug his small fingers into the edge of the stone. Together, they pried it up to reveal a rusted metal box, larger than Martha's, the size of a bread loaf. A padlock secured it, crusted with decades of rust. Frank brought out the deed from his shirt and compared it to the engraving on the box's lid. The same legal description appeared on both. His hands shook as he lifted the heavy container. "What is it?" Liam whispered. Before Frank could answer, a shout came from upstream. Flashlight beams cut through the trees. They'd been spotted. Frank shoved the box under his arm and grabbed Liam. "Run!" They splashed through the creek. Water spraying as bullets kicked up geysers around them. Frank angled toward the old logging road, overgrown now, but would lead them to the abandoned Thompson farm. Liam stumbled on a slick rock. Frank caught him just as a bullet whined past his ear. He returned fire blindly with his last bullet, hearing a satisfying yelp of pain from their pursuers. The old farmhouse appeared like a ghost in the moonlight. Its roof caved in, but the stone cellar still intact. Frank kicked open a rotting door, and they tumbled down the steps just as more gunfire peppered the walls above them. In the damp darkness, Frank lit a match. The cellar walls were lined with empty jars and rusted tools. He barricaded the door with a heavy workbench while Liam caught his breath. "Are they gone?" Liam asked between gasps. "For now." Frank set the metal box on a barrel and examined the lock. The key from Martha's box didn't fit. Liam picked up a rusted pry bar from the floor. "Will this help?" Frank smiled grimly. "Good thinking." 3 heavy blows shattered the lock. The lid creaked open to reveal oilcloth-wrapped bundles. Frank peeled back the first layer to find stacks of faded documents, land surveys, mining claims, and a thick envelope marked McCullough v. Mercer, 1932. At the bottom lay a small leather journal. Frank opened it to find his grandfather's handwriting. Asterisk, they poisoned the creek and called an accident, killed 12 men, and claimed the land as payment for debts. The Mercers have stolen what they couldn't earn, but the silver doesn't belong to them. Asterisk. Frank's blood ran cold. He'd heard the stories, how his great-grandfather lost a family fortune in the Depression. But this, a thunderous crash came from above. The barricade shuddered as something heavy hit the door. Liam grabbed Frank's arm. "They found us." Frank stuffed the documents inside his shirt and scanned the cellar. His eyes landed on a rusted coal chute in the far wall, just wide enough for a child. "Through there," Frank said, pushing Liam toward it. "Follow the tunnel to the creek. Wait for me by the big rock where we fish." But no arguments. Frank pressed the deed into Liam's hands. "Guard this with your life." As Liam wriggled into the chute, the cellar door splintered. Frank turned to face the stairs, raising the pry bar like a club. The first man through the door didn't see the blow coming. The second barely had time to yell before Frank was on him. Somewhere behind the pain and rage, Frank marveled at his own strength. 72 years old and fighting like a cornered wolf. Martha would have laughed. Then the gunshot came. White-hot pain exploded in Frank's side. He fell against the barrels, sending the empty metal box clattering to the floor. Through blurred vision, he saw Dale standing at the top of the stairs, smoke curling from his pistol. "Should have taken the money, old man," Dale said, stepping closer. Frank's fingers closed around a broken jar at his side. As Dale leaned down, Frank drove the jagged glass into his thigh. Dale screamed. Frank didn't wait to see what happened next. He rolled toward the coal chute and dragged himself into the narrow tunnel just as another shot rang out. The darkness swallowed him whole. The cold tunnel stank of damp earth and rotting wood. Frank crawled blindly, his wounded side leaving a slick trail behind him. Somewhere ahead, faint moonlight beckoned. He emerged gasping at the creek bank. The cold water revived him enough to stagger to his feet. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his body, but the thought of Liam waiting kept him moving. The fishing rock stood 50 yards downstream. No sign of Liam. Frank's heart clenched. Had the boy been caught? Had a small figure detached itself from the shadows. Liam ran to him, eyes wide at the blood soaking Frank's shirt. "You're hurt." "Just a scratch," Frank lied. "Did anyone follow you?" Liam shook his head. "I hid when I heard shots." His small hands fluttered over Frank's wound. "We need to get you help." Frank slumped against the rock, pulling out the stolen documents. The moon provided just enough light to read the damning truth. The Mercers had falsified mining reports in the 1930s, then used court orders to seize the land when the McCulloughs couldn't pay their debts. But the silver vein they found ran deeper than anyone knew, directly under Frank's house. "It was never about the house," Frank murmured. "They wanted what's beneath it." Liam frowned at the papers. "Is that why Dad—" Frank didn't answer. Some truths were too heavy for a child. Instead, he folded the documents and tucked them away. "We need to get to town," Frank said. "Sheriff Hayes might still—" A twig snapped behind them. Frank spun, shielding Liam with his body. Carl stepped from the trees, his face haggard in the moonlight. Blood streaked his shirt sleeve where Frank had struck him earlier. For a long moment, father and son stared at each other. Then Carl slowly raised his hands. "I didn't know," Carl said hoarsely. "About the mine. About any of it." Frank kept his body between Liam and Carl. "You brought them to my door." Carl's face twisted. "Dale said you were sick, that you'd signed the papers but didn't remember, that we were helping you." His voice broke. "Then I saw what they did to you tonight." Liam peeked around Frank. "Dad." Carl sank to his knees. "I'm sorry. God help me, I'm so sorry." Frank studied his son, really studied him. The boy he'd taught to fish in this very creek. The man who'd stood by while others attacked his own father. The choice should have been easy, but family rarely was. Frank exhaled sharply. "Get up, we got work to do." As Carl rose, Frank pressed the documents into his hands. "Take these to Sheriff Hayes. Tell him everything." Carl hesitated. "What about you?" Frank touched his wounded side. "I'll slow you down. Liam and I will head for the Johnson place. It's closer." Carl's jaw tightened. "Dale's got men watching all the roads. Then we won't take the roads." Frank turned to Liam. "You remember the way through Black Hollow?" "Tell me about Grandma," Liam said suddenly as they rested beneath an overhang. Frank smiled weakly. "She hated this hollow. Said the rocks looked like teeth." "Was she scared of things?" "Only losing family." Frank touched the documents in his pocket. "She kept secrets to protect us. But some secrets—" A distant engine interrupted him. Then another. Headlights swept the ridge above the hollow. Liam tensed. "They're coming." Frank pushed to his feet. "Not far now." They moved faster, Frank biting back groans with each jarring step. The hollow opened onto a steep slope leading up to the Johnson's fence line. Just a little farther, a rifle shot cracked through the night. Dirt exploded at Frank's feet. He yanked Liam down as more shots rang out. Flashlights appeared along the ridge above them. "Run for the fence." Frank shoved Liam forward. The boy hesitated. "But you—" "Go." Liam ran, zigzagging up the slope as bullets kicked up dirt around him. Frank turned to face their pursuers, raising the pry bar he'd kept all this way. 3 men descended the slope, Dale limping at the rear with a bloody bandage around his thigh. His face twisted in triumph when he saw Frank standing alone. "Where's the boy, Frank? Where's the deed?" Frank spat blood. "Gone. Along with your lies." Dale's smile faded. He raised his pistol. "Then I'll start with you and find them later." The gunshot echoed through the hollow, but Frank didn't fall. Instead, Dale staggered back, clutching his shoulder as another shot rang out from above. Frank turned to see Old Man Johnson standing at the fence with a hunting rifle, Liam at his side. More shots came from the road. Sheriff's deputies' cars skidded to a halt, lights flashing. Dale's men scattered like rats. As the sheriff's men gave chase, Frank sank to his knees. The world swam in and out of focus. Strong hands caught him as he fell. Carl's hands. "Hold on, Dad," Carl said, his voice thick. "Just hold on." Frank smiled as darkness took him. Somewhere in the distance, Liam was shouting for help. And for the first time in years, the McCulloughs were shouting together. The smell of antiseptic stung Frank's nose before he even opened his eyes. "Hospital. Again." He groaned, the dull ache in his side flaring as he shifted. A small hand gripped his. "Grandpa." Frank pried his eyes open. Liam's face hovered above him, one eye blackened, his arm in a sling, but alive. Behind him stood Carl, his face drawn with exhaustion, a stack of papers clutched in his hands. "You've been out 2 days," Carl said quietly. "Doctor says the bullet cracked a rib, but missed anything vital." He hesitated. "Dale's in custody. So are most of his men." Frank swallowed against a dry throat. "The deed?" Carl held up the documents. Sheriff Hayes filed them with the county recorder first thing yesterday. Turns out great-granddad hid more than silver under that land. He unfolded a brittle map. Oil surveys from 1911. The Mercers have been trying to get their hands on it for generations. Frank closed his eyes. Martha had known. All those years, she kept the truth buried to protect him from the greed that had already taken so much. Liam squeezed his hand. "The sheriff says the house is yours again. For real this time." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Hayes stepped in, hat in hand. "Frank, glad to see you in one piece." He nodded at the documents. "We got enough here to put Dale away for a good long while. Forgery, conspiracy, attempted murder." He glanced at Carl. "Your boy's been cooperating. That'll go easy on his record." Frank studied his son. The shame in Carl's eyes was its own punishment. The sheriff cleared his throat. "There's one more thing." He pulled a faded photograph from his pocket. A group of miners standing in front of a shaft entrance. "Found this in Dale's safe. Recognized your grandfather right away." He pointed to the mine's wooden sign. "But it's the name that's interesting." Frank squinted. The weathered letters spelled McCullough number 3. "Turns out," the sheriff continued, "the Mercers didn't just steal your land. They stole your name. That silver mine was always yours." The room fell silent. 1 month later, Frank stood on his porch, watching the sunrise paint the fields gold. The broken shutter had been nailed back in place, the bullet holes in the siding patched. Inside, Liam's laughter echoed from the kitchen where Carl was making pancakes, the smell of maple syrup mixing with the crisp autumn air. The legal battles would drag on for months. The mineral rights alone were worth a fortune. But none of that mattered as much as the way of the old house, key in Frank's pocket. Liam bounded onto the porch, syrup smeared on his cheek. "Dad says we're going fishing after breakfast." Frank ruffled the boy's hair. "That's so." "Yep, and he promised to teach me how to whittle like you taught him." Behind them, the screen door creaked open. Carl stepped out, holding 2 steaming mugs. He handed one to Frank, their eyes meeting over the rim. No words were needed. The past wasn't forgiven, not entirely, but it was a start. As the first rays of sunlight crested the ridge, illuminating the old willow by the creek, Frank took a slow sip of coffee. The house stood solid behind him, its floors whispering with the ghosts of all the love and pain it had witnessed. And for the first time in years, it felt like home again. Epilogue, the legacy. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Thick parchment, embossed with the State Historical Society seal. They wanted to designate the mine as a protected site. Wanted Frank's permission. He read it aloud at the dinner table, Liam hanging on every word, Carl listening quietly. When Frank finished, Liam bounced in his seat. "Does this mean we're rich?" Carl snorted. Frank smiled. "It means we remember," Frank said softly. He looked at his son, then his grandson. "The land isn't what matters. It's the people who fight for it." Later, as Frank tucked the letter into Martha's metal box beside the deed, his fingers brushed against one last paper he hadn't noticed before, a faded recipe card in her handwriting. "Blackberry cobbler," it read, "for when the boys come home." Outside, Liam's whoops of joy carried from the yard, where Carl was showing him how to split firewood. The sound, mingled with the wind chimes Martha had hung decades ago. Frank closed the box with a quiet click. Some legacies, he thought, were worth the fight. The end.